Hey everyone, today we're going to go through the process of how to export our models from Maya and how to set them up in Substance Painter for texturing. Here are the key things I will cover in this tutorial: material assignment in Maya and how they impact texture sets in Substance Painter, exporting our models from Maya, setting up our project in Substance Painter, baking mesh maps in Substance Painter, and setting up our texture sets with layers, masks, and material instancing for texturing. Feel free to use the timestamps to jump to wherever you need to in this video. So with that, let's get started. Alright, so here we are in Maya. As you can see, we have our completed Hammerboy concept and character, and we now want to take him into Substance Painter for texturing. So the first thing that we need to look at is our UVs. In the previous tutorial, I went through the entire process of how to unwrap the character, and you can see that I have this broken up by UV sets here. So I have the character group, I have the hair, I have the clothing, just so you can see that, kind of how it's broken up. And then I have kind of the goggles and the hammer on one UV set. So I have 4 total UVs and texture maps that will be used to texture this entire character. Now, when going into Substance Painter does not care about any of this structuring here. What Substance Painter does care about is the materials. Now, if I take a look at all of these materials, what Substance Painter will do is essentially create a texture set for each one of these materials. So you can see, here's one for my shirt, my shorts, my gloves, leather, and everything that's on the hammer, and it would just turn into a huge mess. And the more materials that you have, the more texture sets you're going to have, which is not what we want in this case. What we want right now is to set up our texture sets essentially by these groups. So what I would typically do is save right where I'm at here with all this material application so that I have it and I can reference that later. And then we're going to assign materials to these groups here. So if I open up this group, I can select the character body, hold right click, and assign favorite material. And I'm just going to do Phong, okay? It really doesn't matter because all that really matters is the color information, okay? And I'm going to set this to a distinct color, and this will be red, okay? Next thing I'm going to do is grab my hair, select all my objects in this group, and I'm going to hold right click again and assign favorite material, and I will do another Phong, and then this will be the next material set, and I can change this to maybe a blue, okay? Now, don't worry, none of this is going to carry over. We're just doing this to differentiate between the two. And then finally, I'm going to select my clothing group, and you can see all the different clothing here. And I'll go ahead and assign material and set this to green. Okay, there we go. So I, for now, hide my goggles and hammer, as we don't need that. We won't be texturing that or setting that up right now. And you can see everything set up, and it's going to combine and create our texture sets based off of these colors and materials. Now, what we want to make sure we do is to go back here to our Hypershade and select those materials that we just created. And you can see that we want to name this because Substance Painter will take the name of this material. So I will call this skin, or I'll call it body because this is the main body base. Okay. The next one I'll take is just hair. And then the clothing will be just, or green will just be clothing. Or clothes, probably for shorter. Okay, with all of our materials assigned, the last thing that you want to do is just do a final check on your UVs. So if I open up my UV, go to UV editor and check, I see that everything's looking good. There's no overlapping UVs. There's no floating UVs. In this tutorial, we will not be using what's called UDIMs, so we won't be using any textures that are kind of on the next coordinate system, okay? So with that in mind, you do want to check your UV sets and make sure that you only have one map here, okay? You may not be sure why, but just that's essentially the UV channel. And since we're not using UDIMs, we don't really care about that right now. And a good viewer here is UV set editor, and you can see that I only have map 1, which is perfect. Okay, so that'll make sure things are nice and clean as they're going in. And again, doing one final pass, making sure that our UVs are nicely unfolded, packed, laid out the way that they need to be. You also want to organize them in a way that makes sense. So I wouldn't have like half of the shorts down here and the other half in the corner and the shirt all spread out, right? So just make sure to organize your UVs in a way that makes sense. Will make it your life easier when you're texturing. Okay, so with that now, I can just select my character main here and go to File, Export. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and open this or save this out here in a folder, and let me move this back to the main screen. We have exports here, and I just made a folder. All I did just in my Maya project, just Maya modeling, substance, and then exports. And I want to change this to FBX. Okay, and if I find FBX here, you see it's right there. All right, and I will call this, character export. And we will just use the default Autodesk Media Entertainment and export selection and let it do its thing. Okay, and that's it. So once we made sure we verified everything is working the way that we want and looks the way that we want, we can now jump to Substance Painter. All right, so let's go ahead and open up Substance Painter here. So I am using Substance Painter 2020.2, but you'll still be able to follow along even if you're using earlier versions. So go to File, New, and we're just going to run through these settings here real quick. So the template is going to be PBR. We want to make sure that we stick with just PBR metallic roughness. You can see that there's a whole bunch of them here. And we just want the algorithmic. Basically, this is just the default PBR, which is, again, is just physically based rendering. And that'll give us exactly what we need. Okay. Then we want File. So go ahead and select File, and we can see that we have our character export here that I exported into our exports folder. So go ahead and hit Open. And document resolution, I want to set this to 2K. And we definitely have the capability of exporting larger resolutions, but for our working resolution, 2K should be fine. If you have lower powered GPU, I would suggest dropping this to 1K or probably not 512, but most recent cards and GPUs should be fine. Normal map resolution can stay at DirectX, and we can disable compute tangent space per fragment. And this may be enabled by default. So what you want to do is just disable use UV tile workflow. This is that UDIMs workflow that I was talking about, which we're not going to need. And then disable cameras and auto unwrap, since we already have our characters unwrapped and we don't need any cameras. So go ahead and hit OK. All right, and there he is. So here's our Hammer Boy. You can see that we have a 3D view. And if you just hold Alt here in the left 3D viewport, you can see you have all of the camera controls, and these are thankfully just like Maya. So Alt left click to rotate around or orbit around, Alt middle mouse to pan, and then Alt right click to zoom. And then on the right panel here, you can see if I hold Alt and middle mouse drag, again, same thing. This is now just our 2D UV editor, okay? And we can texture things here, use stencils, paint. Sometimes, some people only want to paint in 3D and won't need this, but we'll keep these open here. Down at the bottom, these are all our assets, which contains all of our alphas, brushes, effects, materials, and what's called smart materials, which we'll be getting into later. Over here to the right, we have layers. So these behave, if you've used Photoshop before as your regular layering system, anything on top will be the active layer or the most visible layer, and then we can change some things with masks and blending, which again we'll do as we move through. Now, here we are with texture set list. You see body base, clothes, and hair. These are the three that I exported from Maya here. So if we jump back to Maya real quick, these are all based off of these materials, these three materials that I created for body base, clothes, and then hair, okay? And if I brought in them as the default materials that I had set up, you can imagine that I would have all sorts of texture set lists. And what this does is that it allows all of my UVs and textures that I had packed within each group to be packed within each texture set, okay? Now, in some instances, you may want to have separate maps. Like if I wanted to break out the boots and gloves onto a separate texture set, you absolutely can, and then you can composite that later. Unfortunately, as of recording this video now, there is no way to collapse layers on export, so you have to use custom scripts or you have to use Substance Designer. This way, we'll be able to implement some techniques that allow us to have complete control over layering and masking, so it doesn't matter if I have multiple objects combined. As long as they are not overlapping, we'll be good to go. All right, here is our properties paint. So this is just our brush settings, our fill layers and all that good stuff, material properties. So we'll get into that once we get into painting. And then if I actually move this texture set settings up, here are the texture settings within the project. Now that we've kind of done a quick high level overview and we have our project or our model imported into our project, the very first step that you always want to do is to go to texture set settings, scroll down, and find bake mesh maps. So take a look at our character here, and if I do bake mesh maps, you'll see what kind of pops up. These are all of our PBR textures. You can see we have normal for normal map, world space normal. We have material IDs, ambient occlusion, curvature, position, thickness. All of these are used within Substance. And if you don't bake these, then you're going to be missing out on a ton of procedural benefits and generators, smart masks, smart materials. All of those rely on these. So just make sure to always come in, and the first thing that you can do is set these to a higher resolution. Again, if you're working on a lower end machine, maybe stick with 512. I'll just go ahead and set these now to 2048, and I'll go ahead now with all of these enabled, bake selected textures. And you can see it's making its way through, and it's doing it based by the texture sets. So I'll go ahead and pause and let this go through. Okay, and it's done. So it went through and baked out 21, so 7 maps for each texture set, and everything worked out fine, and we can go ahead and hit OK. Now, under Bake Mesh Maps, we will actually be looking at baking our normal map here with, and maybe ambient occlusion with using a different mesh or using a high poly mesh. So you can use high definition meshes, so we can actually go through and export our models for Maya with subds and subdivision and bake that detail down. For now, we're fine as is. So I will go ahead and just close this now, and we can see that we have our character, and you can see he's got a lot more detail. That detail is coming from ambient occlusion and normal and curvature maps and all of that. Okay, so now that we have that, we can go ahead and start building our masks. Okay, so I know right now if I go ahead and let's say, for example, I grab maybe this, what do we got, leather rough, or maybe we'll just grab a simple leather medium grain here, okay? And I'm gonna just drag that, left click, and bring that over here. And you can see, it applied that leather material to everything. I clearly don't want that, and I only want this to be applied to my gloves and my boots. So what can we do here is, so I can hit Q to kind of get out of here. I don't want to mess with any of the UVs. All I'm using these materials right now for, you guys, is just placeholder. I am using these to set up my masks. So I'm going to create a folder, and I'm going to call one called gloves. All right. Now I'm going to drop my leather in here, and with gloves now, I can select this layer, right click, and add what's called a black mask. Now what a black mask will do in typical digital art is anything that's black will be 100% invisible and gone. You will not be able to see it. And anything that is white, so if I right click that and do add white mask, you can see that now I can see everything. So that's what white and black do here. So we'll keep this as black mask. Then the key thing now is make sure you're selected here and you see the blue rectangle around our mask slot. Okay. And now that I have that, I want to go over here to the left and select polygon fill. Okay, now once you get polygon fill, you see that our properties over here change and it's from white to black. I'm going to leave this at white. And now anything that I add here, you can see if I go ahead now and start to click and drag, it's starting to add that into that mask here. Okay, so this is great, but I really don't want to manually select a bunch of polygons like this. So I'll undo that. And here we have triangle, polygon, and mesh. So as you can imagine, we want mesh. So I can select mesh. Boom, look at that. The entire glove it will now appear as a white mask in our mask here. So if I go ahead now and click the straps, and I can go here now and do the straps on the right side of the character, and there we go. And you see sometimes it takes a second to update, but we're good to go. So you can see our mask now has the gloves as white, and it's applying this leather medium grain. So the next thing I want to do is if I go ahead and create a new one, and let's just make a new one called shirt. And we're going to do the same thing. Right click, add a black mask. And then I can go to polygon fill. And what I want to do is select the shirt. Now I need to make sure that I have something here. You can see that I'm just going to grab maybe just some generic fabric. Okay. So maybe I just grab just fabric rough. It really doesn't matter right now. I just need to see it show up. So there's fabric rough. That looks good. And you can see I added my shirt, and it's only applying to the shirt. So let's do that again. Now we're going to do that with shorts. Okay. So the shorts can be another material, and I will do probably, fine, sure, fabric, or maybe fabric soft denim. Okay. And I'm just grabbing these from the material slot here. And again, you can see, all right, whoops, I didn't set my mask, no problem. Add a black mask, go to polygon fill here, and select mesh fill, and make sure that your color is set to white, and then I can select those shorts, and there we are. Okay, so we can kind of see how those are appearing there. So that looks fine. And now, again, we're just using these as placeholders. I want to do the shoes. Okay, so what I want to do for the shoes is I will go ahead and make a new folder. I should call them boots to stay consistent. And if let's say I just grab again, let's find that leather, but I'm like, you know what? This is going to be made of the same material as these gloves. What I want to do is let's create that mask. So add black mask. enable your mask here. Make sure we're set to white. Mesh fill, and let's just click these here. Now you can't see it because there's no material, but what I want to do is go to gloves, grab this layer here, right click, copy layers, okay? Go back to boots, and you can see that it updated with the masks. Right click again, and what we want to do is paste layer as instance, okay? Now, I want to make sure that is inside my boots layer, and there we are. Look at that. So I'm now using the same material property. So what that means is, let's say I go down here and I want a darker brown leather. There you go. We can have a darker brown leather. I want to go to the, you know, and change the scaling on this. I can. I say, you know, tile it maybe 5 or 10 times. Maybe we'll just do 5 for now. And then move on. Great. So again, these are all I'm doing right now is just setting up my layers and masks. And so I can move forward. And you can see, like, I can go to maybe my shorts here. And I can make those kind of that lighter material here. A little bit more color. And again, I'm just in the properties area here. And we can change the UVs a bit if we want to tile that maybe 10 times. So it doesn't look like it's too large, right? You can see how large these fabrics, these are tiny, very small stitched fabric, okay? So if I go now to the shirt, I can select the fabric rough and just tile the scale. Maybe 10 by 10. If that's a little bit too much, maybe 6, so we can see a little bit, because it is a rough fabric, okay? And I'm fine, I'm not going to worry about anything. But you know what? I forgot. I want to make sure that my collar is also set. So I can go ahead now, create a new folder, move that to the top, and we can call that collar. Then in this collar here, we can make sure that we set a new fabric material and fabric rough, but this time he won't be an instance. And to do that, oops, I accidentally grabbed that one. So I'll grab fabric rough here and I'll drop that there. Okay. All right. And I will just simply add a black mask and add this here. In this case, I would say I can show you, now we can use this checkerboard, which is UV fill. So now I can select it by UVs and I can change this so it's a little bit more obvious. And it's kind of that light tanned color, and maybe we can eyedrop it. And let's say I like this here. If you click and hold, this should be fine here. And that's fine. And then we can just tile this 8 or 6 times or something like that. All right, so that's fine. We just want this as a placeholder, okay? And now that we've done that, we just want to make sure to do that with the rest of the character. And in this case, I can trash this one and trash this layer. And I have everything set up here, okay? So if you want to add a description, you certainly can, but because I named things, I mean, it should be, you know, maybe a little bit more descriptive. I can do skin and eyes. All right. So what I'm going to do now is set up these types of layers here that I just did for the main character. I'm going to do that on the body base and separate out the eyes into their own. And I'm going to do the same thing for the hair, because I have the hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes all together on one map. So I want to separate those out. So I'll go ahead, just pause the video real quick and do that. Okay, so here we are. I have everything set up, broken out with masks, and we can start texturing this guy and getting into more details in the next tutorial. All right. So I've done the same thing here. So you can see that if I go to body base, that I broke up, the pupils, the eyes, the skin as different folders with different masks. And for the hair, same thing. I just broke up the hair, the eyebrows, the lashes, and I just maybe did a couple of simple things here for the hair, where I just, instead of giving it kind of a pre-made material or smart material or something like that, for the hair, I just literally just did a layer with a fill color to get something like this, okay? But again, we're going to get into a lot of the texturing, the basics of texturing in Substance Painter, and really get a stylized looking character by the end of this all right? So again, all of these are just placeholders. The skin is also just using the simple skin material. Let me see if I jump to body base, and you can see skin, it's just using the skin human simple. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the face. We're going to just paint that and make it look a lot more lively, and kind of cover the concepts of painting skin really, and using the smart materials. So everything's set up and ready for us to get into deep texturing. So hopefully you guys found this helpful. As always, if you have any questions or comments, let me know down below, and I'll do my best to respond and update. And like and subscribe is always appreciated. So thanks again, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial, and we'll just keep moving along. Thanks. Take care, everyone.